Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel on next steps for climate resilience. Now, this session is organized and presented by the World Economic Forum in collaboration with the Shanghai Media Group. My name is Chen. I'm a reporter and presenter with Shanghai Media Group. So it's my great honor to be guiding the conversations today. And it's great to see all of you here. If you're sharing insights from the conversation online, please remember to use the hashtag AMNC25. Thank you. Now, let's start with a very simple reality. Climate change is happening. It's already impacting and reshaping the way we live, we work, and even we do business. So I'd like to share some facts and figures with you first. In 2024, we hit the hottest year on record. I think if you're in Tianjin these days, you already feel that, right? And the impact of climate hazards, it's already very tangible for business. According to the World Economic Forum's recent report, which was published in 2024, I think it was in November 2024, the report was published, Business on the Edge, Building Industry Resilience Towards Climate Hazard. Now, we're talking about over $1.1 trillion in losses, annual losses, by 2055, if we stay on the current trajectory. And also, companies could expect to lose up to over 7% of their annual earnings if they don't adapt. So it's a serious problem. It's a now problem. So the opportunities are here too. There's always the upside. So the opportunities is for every dollar spent on climate resilience, you can expect to see a return of 2 to 19 times. So it's not just a sustainable imperative, it's actually a business case. And what's even better is we have tools. We've got AI, we've got early warning systems. So we do have the tools. The question now is, how do we take the next step? And how do we learn from what's already working? And how do we make climate resilience a core driver of how we do business? And to discuss that, we have a very remarkable panel today across from science to finance to the corporate world. And I'd like to introduce them now. So sitting next to me is Professor Deliang Chen from the Department of Earth System Science at Tsinghua University. Now, Professor Chen has been very closely involved in the forum's recent work on climate hazards and tipping points. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
And we have Lindsay Hooper, CEO of University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Lindsay's got over 20 years of expertise helping global business leaders accelerate towards sustainability. Welcome, Lindsay. And we have Dr. Mahmoud Mohieldin. He is the UN Special Envoy for Financing Sustainable Development. Dr. Mahmoud has been leading the global financing efforts to build climate resilience, especially in emerging markets. Welcome, Dr. Mahmoud. And we have Solveigh Hieronimus, I hope I pronounced her name right, senior partner at McKinsey and Company. So Solveigh advises clients in heavily regulated industries on sustainability, innovation, and digital transformation. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Strebel, and he's the CEO of Reinsurance China and country president of Swiss Re in China. Now, as a risk expert, today he's going to share with us how the insurance sector is helping companies not only recover from climate shocks, but to proactively prepare for them. So let's give a round of applause to all the panelists today. Thank you very much. So I'd like to start with Professor Chen. Professor, can you help us set the scene? I know you helped shape the forum's report on Business on the Edge. So what sort of critical climate hazards are we facing today, and why do you think the business world should be paying close attention?
Yes. And I was involved in the Chinese version of the report, which was also a learning experience for me. Although I have been working in the climate change research for over 35 years, and I think that the report has laid out the facts about the numbers you have mentioned, and so we are facing a huge challenge, and there's a looming risk of climate tipping points, such as the disruption of the ocean currents. As you know, that can cause a lot of changes, disruptions in the weather system, and especially for the agriculture production, etc. sector. We also are facing a real risk of the melting of glaciers on Greenland and West Antarctica, which can raise the sea level by 10 meters think about 10 meters, up to 10 meters. And I was involved in the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report last time. And we made the projection that by the end of the century, we are facing a sea level rise around 1 meter. That is a kind of normal number. That already can cause a lot of trouble, as we know. But up to 10 meters, so additional 9 meters, you can imagine yourself. But this is, of course, the probability is still small, but taking from a risk perspective, it is something we need to consider. And with all this, and also we have increasing extreme events, which we experience everywhere almost. And I just came from Europe yesterday, and even Europe, we know that heat wave, for example, is something quite common in Asia. But in Europe, it's something that we recently, over recent years, we really feel. We feel the damage that it's causing. So I think all this tells us that it's time to act. And it's also, as you mentioned before, it is not just taking the risk, but also it's a business opportunity.
Right, thank you. Well, why don't we bring that scientific risk into the boardroom? Lindsay, I know you work with global leaders. What do you see as the major misconceptions about climate resilience that are still persistent within the boardroom, and how are they being challenged?
Yes, I want to just start by acknowledging how valuable a report that was, really valuable, and we need more resources and tools like this to inform decision-making, whether it's executive or board level. I see a number of challenges. The first one, it's a kind of question about whether to act, and then there are a range of challenges around what the nature of the response looks like. And the first is that, although as you framed it, this is very serious, it's a now problem, you've just highlighted that we're seeing in Europe the direct consequences of inaction, heat waves, wildfires, water scarcity. In spite of that, in spite of the growing analysis, the scientific analysis, but also the economic analysis, I still see a prevailing narrative or belief that these are just long-term issues, not today issues, and an underestimate of the consequences for their particular business or their particular sector. And that leads to a certain level of complacency, like, yes, of course, we need to act, but these are not the biggest things for us to be responding to now. I don't think just more macroeconomic analysis will cut through. What we find cutting through most powerfully is being able to tell stories that bring to life what does this mean in practical terms. So some of the communications from the insurance sector are really powerful. The board member of Allianz telling a story of the, not just the likelihood, but the certainty of a climate-induced credit crunch, that can be really powerful. Or telling the very real stories of direct losses, Panama Canal having reduced revenues because of low water levels and so on. You can't manufacture if you can't get access to water. So stories that really bring that to life and land that at a company or sectoral level. But it's also not surprising that we have that perception, because the tools that boards, companies are relying on are not yet fit for purpose. A lot of the investment models are focused only on built environment and infrastructure and not yet relevant for a range of asset classes. A lot of the scenarios are very long-term, and we need more tools and scenarios that talk about what the short-term consequences are. So I know there's also work by WBCSD, I know UNEP-FI has a dashboard of useful tools. We also need scenarios. We need businesses to be able to test their strategy against plausible futures. And these are, we don't yet have those practical decision support tools. So complacency and lack of support tools are really important. And very briefly then, once a business has decided, yes, we recognize this as urgent, some of the challenges there are, well, how to access the finance to be able to transition. And there are emerging tools and opportunities, whether within the value chain, working with the public sector, but increasingly partnering with insurers, I think, is critical. So there's a big piece on financing. I think tech is so important, and I know we're likely to come on to that, but over-reliance only on tech is a risk. Looking at other ways of working, looking at the importance of investing in nature is really important. And then recognizing you can't future-proof yourself in a world in chaos. The need for systemic solutions rather than just enterprise-level solutions is critical. And then the final piece, although I know this conversation is very much about the physical risks, the important to think alongside that transition risks, the risk of being outcompeted if others are transitioning faster than you are.
Right. Well, Lindsay, you mentioned a very good point. A lot of companies do think this is not a today problem. They think it's still long term, and they understand they need to take action, but maybe not at this moment. It's not that urgent. So Dr. Mahmoud, I would like to ask the same question. Do you think there's a similar sentiment on the government and policy side, because you work with a lot of public and multilateral funding space?
Right. Well, we believe in science, and evidence had been shared, but there is very much little action. And action here is measured by flows of finance and investments. And if the figures are right, that if every dollar spent, this brings at least $2, and it could really reach close to 20. I think the figures are ranging between $18 to 19. So one wonders what then is happening to prevent this kind of flows of funds. Because if the returns are much, much less than that, you will be seeing the private sector engaged. And there is a great deal of issues here related to information, the communication, how the data systems are enabling the business sector to take actions. There is something else that since the Paris Agreement, there had been attention given to mitigation and decarbonization in a kind of a generous assumption that if we are doing sufficiently well in that front, we are not going to be in need for doing more in adaptation or resilience. But now we are very much beyond the trajectories, and the 1.5 degrees world is a reality, unfortunately. And the kind of investments required for adaptation or resilience need really to be spelled out in a better way. Because if I go back home to the business community or to the villagers, I say, well, adapt, okay, well, we'll do it. Okay, but how can we do that? Yeah. But if you put it as in the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, put that in lines of business. It's basically about better water management, food systems, agriculture, investing in the infrastructure of cities and villages. Here you can really see some possibilities of public-private partnership more than what we have. The other thing is basically about the incentives for the private sector. They more than 95%, actually to be exact, based on the Center of Global Adaptation, based on the Netherlands, it's less than 3% of finance is coming from the private sector. People can challenge that. They say, well, it could be an issue of categorization, or there could be different taxonomy. But with the same kind of taxonomy, we had around 4% a couple of years ago, and today we have less than 3%. We could be doing better in other areas, but I think definitely we need much more. There is another thing, that unlike the areas related to emissions, people feel that if you are spoiling the environment somewhere, and if you are producing harmful emissions somewhere in the world because of the ecosystem, and it's an integrated one, that will feel it elsewhere. But there is a kind of misconception that if there is a sort of compromise in areas related to resilience, this will be very much localized. Right. So the communities impacted needs really to be taken care of it. But we have seen that it's not really true scientifically, and we have seen people, because of forced migration and being refugees because of climate and deterioration of nature, that's not ending to be a localized kind of nature, of matter. So the very final thing, and how to do better in this area, is basically about the incentive structure. How can we use the budgets better in order to incentivize the private sector and the business community at large, in addition to the community in society, to contribute to what could be realized as higher return kind of investment than being perceived. The other thing is basically the role of the multilateral development banks, development finance institutions, and those who are pricing risk. And here it's good to see the role of the insurance sector, because the beauty of the insurance sector is not just about talking about risk, they price risk, and they are going to be harmed if that pricing is not adequately done. And the very final thing, one of the contributions of the COP27 and then COP28 is the operationalization of what's called the loss and damage fund. If we are starting to understand that we are compromised first in the mitigation, So that will have impact on resilience. If we're not doing the right thing on the resilience, that will have an impact on the losses and damages incurred. So we start to see some sort of better understanding of the cost of doing nothing than just the assumptions that we are working with. And there are solutions, including, of course, in science, when it's telling us that there are early warning systems using AI, and the Secretary General of the UN has been calling for this kind of a global system of early warning. But it's not enough just to have early warning system, because you can have a fire alarm somewhere, but if you don't have the capacity to respond, this will be just ending in frustration. So we need more investment in capacity building as well to respond to these kind of early warning systems when they are available.
Dr. Mahmoud, it was quite shocking for me to hear that only less than 3% of the funding actually come from the private sector. I think just like any business activity, you know, if you take action now, today, you probably have the first mover advantage, right? Be it financing or adaptation. So Solveig, I know you advise a lot of sectors and companies like in energy and infrastructure, which are sectors that are already heavily impacted by climate risks. So do you think these companies or these sectors, they are ahead of the curve when it comes to understanding and acting on climate resilience?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question, and thank you for asking. I think it's a bit of a yes and as an answer. So of course, if you're in the business of physical assets, so if you have energy grids, if you have telco infrastructure, if you have all sorts of other mobility infrastructure, of course, these are like critical assets, and you think about how to protect them because these like the base on which you operate, yes. And I do think, though, we've learned a thing or two on what is even risk and what's resilience and what's worth protecting. Because you had asked me 10 years ago, those would have been in the category of those are the assets, this is how you think about protecting. What about data centers today? For instance, is that now critical infrastructure? I would suppose so, because none of our economies would be actually running in that kind of like setting. So I think there's different critical assets, different things to be protected. And also I think in terms of risk and resilience, you would probably look with all the crises we've actually seen recently and globally, unfortunately, from like COVID to energy crisis to whatnot. I think the concentric circles of what's worth protecting, like is it your own assets versus is it actually your supply chains? Is it actually how it globally hangs together has gotten much, much more complex. So probably yes on physical assets, new kids on the block on what other assets, and then also the complexity of supply chains. And I think what's there to be learned, of course, like some of those practices and more collaboration, but then actually learning from each other in a network, because if anything, crises accelerate.
What about the insurance sector, Bad? How is climate risks reshaping the insurance landscape, and what can we expect to see in the change of strategy for insurance companies?
Yeah, so climate risk is obviously something which is at the heart of what we are doing. At our company, we started to perform research and modeling of climate risks about 30 years ago. And it's actually interesting as well how terminology has been changing over the years. We started off with climate change, which is a neutral term. Now today here you use the term of climate risk, but actually more and more when you read the news, we talk about climate crisis or climate emergency, which actually speaks to how acute the topic is now. And so if we link that to the purpose of our company, which is to make the world more resilient, it's obvious that climate risk is at the core of what we do. We deal with this on a daily basis now. And so maybe just a couple of data points. There's a lot of by now empiric evidence that weather-related events, both severity and frequency, have been increasing over the last 50 years. And this is just going to continue, like for at least the lifespan of each of us here in the room. So it's not going to go away. It's just going to become bigger. There's no doubt about that. Originally, we spoke about the exposure of assets, and also the impact of climate risks on assets. It's now more and more as well livelihood. And when you look actually at the impact of extreme heat waves, last year more than 500,000 people died because of heat waves. That's actually more than combined fatalities from earthquakes, flood, and hurricanes. The value of assets exposed to climate risk is growing at a rate of 5 to 7% annually, probably for the next 10, 20 years. Most of it is related to increased climate risk. Part of it as well is obviously to asset accumulation in specific zones, to inflation, and so on. Now, from our perspective in the insurance industry, a concerning element is that actually most of these assets are currently not insured. When we have major natural catastrophe-related events, on average, only 40% of the economic loss is insured. Actually, China here, unfortunately, is at the lower end of the scale. We had last year this super typhoon going over Hainan in September. It caused economic losses of above $10 billion and only 300 million were insured. So 3 percentage points, so very, very low. And then maybe a third data point is that there's some natural catastrophe risks which we understand quite well, like hurricane, because we have been modeling a lot. But then the so-called secondary perils, like flash flood, like hail, like drought, we don't really understand them that well. So we're still lacking data, and we're lacking good models to deal with it. And so the way we respond to it, and obviously for us, if you see that the protection gap is so big, it's first and foremost a big business opportunity, but obviously it comes with a lot of challenges. We need to make sure financing is there. If assets exposed grow 5 to 7%, as well our capacity to support these risks need to grow at the same speed, be it through traditional insurance capacity or bringing asset risks to the capital markets now. Second thing is, and I think Mahmoud referred to it as well, is there's certain scenarios and deals where we as the private sector, we cannot deal with it alone anymore. So it only works with public-private partnerships coming together. And the third one is continued investment in data, in modeling, in analytics, because we as private companies, we can only really insure and reinsure risks if we can assess the risks, if we can put a number to it. What is the likelihood and what is the impact and materiality of it?
I think we'll go on and to talk more about the risk assessment a little bit later, but now I want to just take a step back a little bit. Professor Chen, could you help us just briefly sum up? So when we talk about climate resilience and adaptation, what sort of actions are we talking about in practical terms?
Yes, we hear first the terminology here. People use adaptation and resilience quite often, almost as the same thing. Yeah. Or even more, that many people believe that the adaptation covers even other aspects. So I would say that resilience is much more to start with. It includes also adaptation. Because what is resilience? Resilience is we have the capability to resist to the disturbance, number one. Number two is that we can adapt to the disturbance or new situations. So adaptation is included as well. Number three is that we can also be in a better position if we really have a resilient system to do a better job the next time when the same disturbance comes. So resilience is such a rich concept. I think we should really promote. I hope this forum will have that, to promote the use. And then to answer your question, what are in concrete terms? I think if we think about the dimensions, different dimensions of resilience, we can, of course, to start with what are